What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso, joined as always by Connor Rogers. A rare calm week, dare I say, before Combine, before the league year starts. The Jets hires are all done. We're going to take a breath. We're going to talk about the Jets' needs. We're going to talk about Connor's recently dropped top 50 for the 2025 NFL Draft for NBC. CR, how you doing? How you feeling? Nice jersey. Feeling patriotic on the pod tonight?
Yeah, representing the USA hockey team a little bit today. It's funny you bring it up that way. I go through my day and I had just a busy Tuesday. I went to NBC. We were meeting for a ton of stuff with the Combine. Had the Mets pod, had stock exchange. I was up all night the night before writing the notes in for my top 50 big board, which we're going to talk about today. And then all of a sudden, like after dinner, I was like, I got to do Badlands. Like I haven't thought about the Jets. This is the longest I haven't thought about the Jets. And it might've been 36 hours. I have not thought about the Jets, and we have to do Badlands, which is it's just so funny. It's so rare. The Jets are just in the news or somehow relevant in our group chat almost 24/7, 365. It's like besides a little stretch in June, they're just always something going on with them. So this has been a very, very strange 36 hours. I think the most controversial Jets thing is I brought up Tyler Warren, and 60% of the people freak out about a tight end in the top 10. And then everyone else is like, we haven't had a guy like this. So we are definitely in the thick of the offseason.
Yeah, it's definitely the quietest like 3 or 4 day stretch it's been where like I woke up this morning, I was like, no, I'm going to like share some old videos. I'm like, there's not really like something to like have a take on that has happened in the last 2 days, that's okay sometimes because I was like, appreciate it because you'll be at Combine next week. We'll be at Combine. Paul will be at Combine. I think Dan will be at Combine. So we'll be rolling deep with Badlands. There'll be a ton of news, leaks, overreactions there. And then it's like the league year's here. And once that happens, it's league year, live show, draft. And then it's like, oh my God, like we need another week like this. So let's go. We're going to go half and half here. We're going to do what podcasts and radio hosts shamelessly do, talk about their own content. So I'm going to start with me ticking through the Jets needs. And I was just riffing on this off the top of my head. I've been talking about it in the Discord, kind of reading through what people are thinking. And I needed to like organize it in my brain before we get into the free agency big board and kind of go and listening to what we've been discussing in Streets of Fire, which is halfway done. It felt like the right time. So Jets needs, we're going to put quarterback aside. We've talked about quarterback enough. We're going to talk about it plenty going forward. Number one, defensive line, which outside of WMD, JJ, and Quinnen, completely wide open. Number two, wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3, because outside of Garrett Wilson, let's assume they have nobody proven on their depth chart. Devontae will be gone. Lazard will be gone. We don't know what Corley is. Gibson's not an NFL receiver. It's not pretty. Number 3, I have safety because they need 2 starters. Now, I'll pause there. I have 7 total on my list. Does that roughly sound right? I look at defensive line and figure out a minimum they need 2 meaningful additions and probably one other like depth rotational player. It could be a backup. But 2 guys, like legit guys. They need two receivers. Again, I'm not expecting them to get like 2 stars or 2 starters, but they need 2 bodies to get reps and play opposite of Garrett Wilson. And then at safety, I think you're kind of just starting over. Like they're not going to start Chuck Clark, Tony Adams, or Ashton Davis, I think. So does that sound about right? And how do you even go about starting to attack that type of level of need with those 3 spots?
It is a lot, right? I'm reminded of it. Now, the Jets have flexibility. They're not, even with the Rodgers cap situation and the dead money they're taking on from the Douglas era, they can make things work where if they want to go get a starter here or go get a starter there in free agency, they could do it. I think I look at it like this. I'll cheat. I think the number one need is pass catcher because it just feels like they have nothing at tight end or wide receiver outside of Garrett Wilson. And that's just...
Yeah. Scary thing.
It's a scary thing. It's hard to exist in the NFL like that. I mean, we know as Jets fans, think of the years we sat there with just absolute nobody committees at wide receiver over and over again. It felt like after the big 2015 year, there was a big drought, really all the way until Garrett got here.
The Jermaine Kearse era.
Right. I think I was going to call it that. It literally reminds me like the Jermaine Kearse era. So that's a problem. So Now, the annoying one is I have no idea what they're going to do with Morgan Moses. But even if they brought him back, like we know his body has been kind of breaking apart a little bit over the last couple of years, unfortunately. He plays through a lot. He's a warrior. Right tackle has become a really big need on this team, specifically because Joe Douglas drafted players that can't play as the depth guys, right? Like Olu, we know is going to be a franchise left tackle, but the Max Mitchells and the Carter Warrens of the world, when they go out there, you're holding your breath every snap. They haven't been NFL players, right? Like I know it's a tough thing to say, but they haven't been NFL players, not second string, third string NFL players.
0 for 2 in the 4th round, Joe Douglas, just 0 for 2.
So I look at it and go, there's so many ways you could break it down. And you're typically not going to get a tackle in free agency. Like that's not how it's going to go. Now, could you sit there and say, can we get someone serviceable on day 2? I liked that plan with Moses back. We'll see. Safety, yeah, you're right. Like it feels like you're just starting over. I wouldn't be shocked if they you can't go into the draft needing 2 safeties, right? Like this isn't going to be the Jamal Adams, Marcus May draft. You have to get a starter in some kind of avenue. The good thing with the defensive line is you need a legit D tackle next to Quinnen, but you really need, you can find capable defensive linemen. They got JFM. They got JFM off waivers, right? Like this is Quentin Jefferson. Was it Al Woods? They were cheap defensive line signings. When you play as big of a rotation on the defensive line, and I don't think Glenn will rotate at the capacity that Ulbrich and Saleh did, but it'll still rotate. You can have committee, normal pay level players. So I think they'll be able to solve that one. I talk about Mason Graham at 7 just because I think he's a great player. But if the Jets took a defensive tackle in the 3rd and 4th round, you'd be like, all right, like these guys should be able to, at least play along with the veterans that we bring in. So yeah, it's a fine line because you look at it and go, okay, I feel like I can go get a safety in free agency. I feel like I can go get a veteran defensive tackle in free agency. I don't feel that way about right tackle. I'd be pleasantly surprised. Yeah, you can go get a veteran pass catcher, number 3 or number 4, but it just kind of highlights that, like, when you look at the first 3 rounds, they kind of need impact from one of a tight end or wide receiver pick, a safety pick, and probably an offensive line pick that could play tackle. Because what if Olu gets hurt again? Then you have no one. So the Jets have a lot of needs. Like we say this a lot, but they have a lot of needs. But
Joe Douglas wasn't good at his job.
Yeah, it wasn't very good. And now you're paying you're dealing with the repercussions of that. But I think those needs are lined up right. It's just my crystal ball tells me you'll feel better sitting here about safety and D-line depth after free agency. If they move on from Morgan Moses, I think you'll be a little uneasy about pass catcher and right tackle on this roster.
Yeah, 4 and 5 on my list were tight end and offensive line, which you alluded to. It sounds like from Connor Hughes that the wind is blowing towards Moses not coming back. And I don't know if that's more of his own volition, either retiring or saying, look, I'm playing one more year. I want to go to the Chiefs. I want to go to a team who's definitely a Super Bowl contender next year. I can't kill the Jets if that's the case. If it's on the Jets, I would say just keep him for a year. For God's sakes, like a great leader in the locker room could hold the fort for another year and doesn't create another hole. Because then when you look at the other options, like the safety market's not terrible in free agency. It's just how many of these guys actually hit the market. Justin Reed will be available. Hufanga could be available.
Javon Holland.
Of course, Justin Simmons is available. He's always available every single year, it seems. And then it's just a matter of like which of these guys, actually, hit the market that you can make move on. Marcus Williams is likely to hit the market. Our old friend from the almost Jets
hit
list.
A really bad year last year, but you never know. Like bounce back. Jason Pinnock.
God,
played almost 90% of the snaps last year.
Wild. I mean, they're going to sign one veteran. I mean, like Reed feels like a nice Band-Aid. Hufanga, you like worry about some of the health stuff, but man, he'd be like the right kind of energy they need on defense without a doubt. I think he'll be like more top of the market. And then receiver, I think that's where you get like a Slayton or a Tim Patrick type. And then you say, all right, are we going to take McMillan or Warren at 7 if Graham's not there? And that's our other pass catcher. And we say, all right, like maybe like we don't feel fully great about the tight end depth chart or the receiver depth chart, but Brees Hall is going to catch a lot of passes. Braylon Allen's going to catch a lot of passes, and you kind of like tape it together. It's hard to say. I don't know if they're going to make that sort of like bigger splash, like trading for a veteran receiver or signing Chris Godwin, who also comes with his injury concerns. I feel like they'll sign a Slayton or Tim Patrick type, and then they're going to address pass catcher early in the NFL draft and say, we're going to run the ball a lot. We're going to throw the ball a lot to Brees Hall. We're going to throw the ball a lot to Davis and Braylon Allen when they're in there, and like it'll be okay. And then I agree. If you're smart on defensive line, it's another spot that's not terrible depth-wise in free agency. You just got to be smart about it. And what rounded out my list was linebacker, because we have to see how they handle Sherwood and Quincy Williams.
It's a big one.
Mosley's likely to retire or be gone, which will help free up some money, but also frees up some reps you're going to have to fill. And then corner, I'm pretty comfortable just starting at like bringing Eccles back. Start Eccles, like put your money at safety, put your money at defensive line, put your money at right tackle. Like I'm not prioritizing giving a huge contract to like Carlton Davis or someone. I could see them maybe internally like wanting to do that to help like mentor Sauce along in their program, but I'd rather spend the money elsewhere. I think you could get by with Sauce, Michael Carter, and Eccles as your corner if you get better at safety and you get better at defensive line. Look, they're going to have to do some work in free agency. Like they need to make like 3 to 4 meaningful signings so they're not just over leveraged in the draft. Like they have all their picks, but they're, as you pointed out, their pick in the third round is like really late in the third round. Yeah. So it's almost like a fourth round pick with how late it is. So that you really need to hit on those first 2 picks with immediate impact players because it's a lot of work to do. And I do get a little anxiety in particular looking at that pass catcher depth chart right now, because it's Garrett Wilson and Corley, who was taken by the old regime and had a nightmare rookie season.
Right.
Conklin, I think he's fine, and I think you could get him back and have him back on sort of the right money, but you need more there, right? You can't count on Ruckert on this point. At this point, you can't count on Yeboah at this point. If it's not going to be Graham at 7, I think both of us like McMillan or Warren. We'll use this as a segue into your top 50. Let's say Graham's gone. There's a reasonable chance that happens. Who would be your next priority? And is it one of those 2 guys? That's where my head goes. If we're not getting Graham, I want the pass catcher at 7. I know some people freak out about Warren at 7. I don't. I think he will be very good. I'm not saying he's going to have like Brock Bowers level production in year 1, but maybe you need a dynamic tight end. I don't know how many times we need to see this. Look at what Goddard does for the Eagles. Look at what the Bills do with Knox and Kincaid. Look at what, and it's bad timing, of course, with how he finished, but look at what the Ravens do with Andrews and Likely. Like, you need to use this position. And from looking at your rankings, feels like Warren and McMillan are not bad value at 7, no?
No, not at all. I think that the only argument against